My name is Dulce Whitford. I'm 28 years old. For 20 years, my parents called me the slow one, while my sister Miranda collected Harvard degrees and inheritance promises. They mocked my dyslexia at dinner tables, excluded me from family decisions, and paid me a fraction of what they paid her. But on Miranda's graduation day at the Plaza Hotel, in front of 350 guests, a stranger handed me an envelope that would expose every lie my parents ever told about me. What they didn't know is that Grandma had been watching. She saw everything. And she left me something that would flip the entire Whitford empire upside down. The Whitfords were old money Manhattan, the kind of family whose name appeared on hospital wings and museum plaques. My father, Gerald Whitford, ran Whitford Properties, a commercial real estate empire my grandmother, Ella Lehner, had built from a single Brooklyn office in 1965. By 2024, the company was valued at $92 million. I was born with dyslexia, diagnosed at 7. The letters on pages would swim and rearrange themselves, turning simple sentences into puzzles that took me 3 times longer to solve than other kids. My parents' response wasn't support. It was shame. They hired tutors for Miranda, violin lessons at Juilliard, French immersion classes, SAT prep with a Princeton graduate who charged $400 an hour. When I asked about help for my reading, my mother Priscilla just sighed. Dulce, we've already spent so much on specialists. At some point, we have to accept that some children just aren't academic. I was 12. I believed her. So I learned to adapt on my own. Audiobooks became my lifeline. I developed a system of visual notes, diagrams, and flowcharts that helped me process information in ways traditional reading couldn't. And every Sunday afternoon, I'd take the train to my grandmother Ella Lehner's apartment on the Upper West Side, where she'd sit with me for hours, explaining concepts through stories instead of textbooks. Dulce, she told me once, her weathered hand covering mine, you read slower than most, but you see things others miss. That's not a disability, sweetheart. That's a different kind of vision. Christmas 2018. 20 relatives gathered around the mahogany table in my parents' Upper East Side townhouse. Crystal chandeliers, catered dinner, the annual performance of Whitford family perfection. My father stood at the head of the table, wine glass raised. I'd like to make an announcement, he said, his voice carrying that boardroom authority he wore like a second skin. Miranda has been accepted to Harvard Law School. Full scholarship. Applause. Cheers. Miranda blushed with practiced modesty. My eldest daughter will be the first Whitford to attend Harvard in 3 generations. Then my father's gaze drifted down the table to me. And Dulce, he paused, the warmth in his voice evaporating. Well, Dulce is also here. A few relatives chuckled. Soft, uncomfortable laughs. Miranda laughed along with them. I stared at my plate. The roasted lamb blurred through the tears I refused to let fall. Under the table, a hand found mine. Thin fingers, papery skin. Grandma Ella Lehner squeezed gently. Her eyes held something fierce, something that looked almost like fury directed at her own son. 3 months later, she called me to her apartment. She pressed a small mahogany box with brass hinges into my hands. Keep this safe. Don't open it yet. When you need it, you'll know. I took the box home, tucked it in my closet, and tried to forget the strange weight of her words. March 2019. Grandma Ella Lehner was 82 then, her once vigorous frame grown thin, her silver hair wispy, but her eyes hadn't dimmed at all. I built Whitford Properties from nothing, she said. 1 office, 1 secretary, 60 years of work. Your father inherited it. He didn't build it. She leaned forward. I judge people by how they treat those who can't fight back. And you, Dulce, you're the only one in this family who knows how to be kind. She pressed the wooden box into my hands again. There's something inside that might help you someday. But not yet. You're not ready yet, and neither is Gerald. When the time comes, when he shows you exactly who he is, you'll know what to do. I wanted to ask what she meant, but she changed the subject. 18 months later, she was gone. Pancreatic cancer. I held her hand in the hospice, the only family member at her bedside. The box remained unopened in my closet. After graduating from a state university in 2022, I applied for a position at Whitford Properties. I wanted to prove I could contribute. My father agreed to hire me as an administrative assistant. Salary: $42,000 a year. That same month, Miranda joined as chief legal counsel. Her salary: $280,000 plus bonuses. My job consisted of photocopying documents, booking conference rooms, and fetching coffee for executives who never learned my name. I wasn't invited to a single meeting, but I watched and I listened. I discovered something about myself during those long hours in the copy room. I could spot patterns others missed. When executives discussed deals in the hallway, I'd sketch diagrams of the relationships between parties, the flow of money, the potential conflicts. A skill I'd developed to compensate for my reading difficulties had become something else entirely. April 2024. The email arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Subject line: Position restructuring, confidential. Dear Ms. Whitford, as part of our ongoing organizational optimization, your current position will be eliminated effective July 1st, 2024. I read it 3 times. The letters swam, rearranged, settled back into the same devastating message. They were firing me. That evening, I stayed late organizing files no one would ever look at. Through the thin wall separating my cubicle from my father's corner office, I heard voices. Gerald and Priscilla. Can't have her here when Miranda takes over, my father was saying. It looks bad. The CEO's sister working as a secretary. We've done everything we could for her, Gerald, my mother said softly. Some children just don't have what it takes. Exactly. So she needs to go. We'll give her a generous severance. I pressed my palm against the wall. My studio apartment in Queens shared with 2 roommates cost $1,800 a month. No savings, no safety net. If I lost this job, I'd be homeless within 2 months. But the money wasn't what made my chest tight. It was the realization settling into my bones like frost. If I let them do this, if I accepted their version of who I was, I would spend the rest of my life as the family failure. Not because I'd actually failed, but because I'd never been given the chance to succeed. May 15, 2024. The Plaza Hotel, Grand Ballroom. 350 guests filled the gilded room. Business partners, investors, lawyers from white shoe firms, extended family members I barely recognized. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across silk tablecloths. A 12-piece orchestra played Gershwin in the corner. I stood in the entrance tugging at the hem of my dress. Black, simple, $79 from Zara. Everyone else glittered in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. My mother intercepted me before I could find a seat. Her gaze traveled from my drugstore makeup to my scuffed heels. You couldn't find anything nicer? This is what I have. She adjusted her Cartier bracelet. You'll be at table 27, near the service entrance. Try not to draw attention to yourself. Tonight is Miranda's night. Whatever resentment you think you're entitled to, keep it to yourself. Table 27 was at the back of the ballroom, partially hidden behind a pillar. From my seat, I could see the main stage, the massive portrait of Miranda in her Harvard regalia, the banner reading, "Congratulations, Miranda Whitford, Harvard Law Class of 2024. Near the entrance, standing alone by the door, a silver-haired man in a gray suit. He wasn't mingling, wasn't eating, just watching. His eyes found mine across the crowded room. At 8:30 p.m., the orchestra stopped. Gerald took the stage. Tonight, I'm not just celebrating Miranda's achievements. I'm announcing her future. Miranda joined him, radiant in emerald Valentino. Effective immediately, Miranda Whitford will inherit my entire estate upon my passing. This includes our family residence at 740 Park Avenue, currently valued at $13 million, and most importantly, the position of CEO of Whitford Properties when I retire. The room erupted. Standing ovation, camera flashes. 350 people celebrating, and not one of them glanced at table 27. Then the silver-haired man began walking toward me. Slowly, deliberately, like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. Miss Whitford. He pulled a business card from his breast pocket. Cream-colored, embossed. Morrison and Blake, attorneys at law. My name is Jonathan Ellis. I was your grandmother's lawyer. My grandmother passed away 3 years ago. I'm aware. He didn't soften. She left something for you with very specific instructions about when to deliver it. From inside his jacket, he produced a cream envelope, heavy stock, sealed with red wax bearing a notary stamp. What is this? Her will. The real one. His voice dropped. The one your father doesn't know exists. I stared at the envelope. The notary seal read Morrison and Blake, September 12, 2019. 5 months after she'd handed me the wooden box. Your grandmother gave me explicit instructions, Ellis said. I was to deliver this on the day your father publicly disinherited you. He glanced toward the stage where Gerald and Miranda were still basking in applause. I believe that just occurred. My hands trembled as I took the envelope. Mr. Ellis, what's in here? Mrs. Ella Laner told me to tell you. Give this to Dulce on the day Gerald shows her exactly who he is. By then, she'll be ready. He straightened his tie. I'll be available when you have questions. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. I pushed through the service entrance, found an empty hallway near the kitchen. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. My fingers shook as I broke the wax seal. Inside, 3 pages of dense legal text. A notarized signature. A date, September 12, 2019. I read slowly, carefully. The letters swam, but I forced them into focus. I, Ella Laner Margaret Whitford, being of sound mind and body, do hereby revoke all previous testamentary documents and declare this to be my last will and testament. My eyes caught on a paragraph near the middle. To my granddaughter, Dulce and Whitford, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Whitford Properties LLC, currently valued at approximately $47 million, along with all voting rights associated therewith. I read it again and again. 51%. Controlling interest. The will continued. This bequest is made with full knowledge of my son Gerald's treatment of Dulce. She has been excluded, diminished, and denied opportunity, not due to lack of ability, but due to lack of support. Dulce is not slow. Dulce was abandoned. And I will not allow her father's prejudice to continue after my death. A sob caught in my throat. Grandma had seen. She'd seen everything. At the bottom, a condition. To activate this bequest, Dulce must formally request an emergency board meeting within 72 hours of receiving this document. Failure to act within this window will render this will null and void. 72 hours. The deadline would fall at 8:30 p.m. on May 18th. Jonathan Ellis was waiting by the coat check when I emerged. The 72-hour clause, I said. Why would she put that in? Your grandmother knew you, Miss Whitford. She knew that if she gave you unlimited time, you might convince yourself not to act. The deadline isn't a punishment. It's permission. Permission to stop waiting for your family to change their minds about you. Through the ballroom doors, I could see my father still on stage posing for photographs with Miranda. Miss Whitford. Alice's voice cut through my spiral. Your grandmother believed in you. She spent the last 3 years of her life preparing for this moment. The question is, do you believe in yourself? I looked at the will in my hands, at the elegant signature of the woman who'd held my hand under Christmas tables and taught me to read contracts like architecture. I'll call you tomorrow, I said. We're requesting that board meeting. Ellis allowed himself a small smile. She said you would. That night, back in my cramped Queens apartment, I finally opened the wooden box. Inside, a handwritten letter on Ella Laner's personal stationery, a faded document with a 1965 date stamp, and a USB drive, sleek and modern, clearly added much later. The letter read, My dearest Dulce, if you're reading this, then Jonathan has done his job, and your father has done exactly what I feared he would. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you while I was alive, but I can protect you now. The enclosed document is the original partnership agreement from 1965. Your father has never seen it. It establishes that the founder's shares carry permanent voting rights that cannot be diluted or transferred without board approval. The USB contains something else. In 2018, Gerald proposed a resolution to reduce my voting rights from 51% to 10%. His stated reason: I was too old to understand modern business. The real reason: he wanted control, and I was in his way. The board rejected his proposal by 2 votes. I was one of those votes. I never forgot what he tried to do. And I never forgave him for the way he treated you to justify it. Use this wisely, Dulce. Not for revenge. For justice. All my love, Grandma Ella. I plugged the USB into my laptop. The file was labeled, Board Meeting Minutes, March 2018. PDF. My father's attempt to strip his own mother of power, documented and timestamped. May 16th, Margaret Coleman answered on the second ring. Her voice carried the rasp of someone who'd smoked for decades and laughed even longer. I've been wondering when you'd call. Your grandmother and I built half of Brooklyn together in the 70s. She talked about you constantly. A pause. She also told me about the will 3 years ago, right before she passed. Then you know what I'm about to do. I know what you're considering doing. There's a difference. Her tone shifted, sharper. Requesting an emergency board meeting requires 3 board members to sign the petition. I'm one. You'll need 2 more. Can you help me find them? I can do better than that. Gerald Whitford isn't as popular as he thinks. Richard Holloway and Susan Parker have both been on the receiving end of his temper in closed sessions. They just need someone to go first. A pause. Dulce, I need you to understand something. This isn't going to be pleasant. Your father will fight. Your sister will fight. They've been saying terrible things my whole life. At least now I get to respond. Margaret laughed, warm and genuine. Ella Lehner always said you had steel under all that quiet. I'm starting to see what she meant. I'll have the petition ready by tonight. May 17th, Gerald found out about the board meeting at 4 p.m. I know this because Miranda called me 45 minutes later, her voice tight with controlled fury. What did you do? I don't know what you're talking about. Margaret Coleman hasn't requested anything in 15 years. What did you do? Maybe she has concerns about company management. Don't play games with me, Dulce. Her composure cracked. If you're trying to embarrass us. I'm just doing my job, Miranda. Same as always. She hung up without saying goodbye. 20 minutes later, Gerald stormed past my cubicle on his way to his office. Through the wall, I heard him on the phone. Dulce, my God, Miranda, she can barely read a spreadsheet. She's not a threat to anyone. I smiled. For the first time in 28 years, being underestimated felt like an advantage. That night I prepared. Printed 3 copies of the will. Downloaded the 2018 board minutes onto my phone as backup. Wrote a brief statement, not an accusation, just a presentation of facts. Jonathan Ellis confirmed he'd attend as the authenticating attorney. Margaret texted at 11 p.m., petition filed. See you tomorrow. Your grandmother would be proud. I barely slept, but for once it wasn't anxiety keeping me awake. It was anticipation. May 18, 2024. 9:45 a.m. Whitford Tower. The elevator opened onto the 42nd floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Italian marble. Corporate opulence designed to intimidate. I stepped out in a borrowed gray blazer 2 sizes too big, carrying a leather portfolio I'd bought at Goodwill for $12. The security guard at the boardroom door held up his hand. You're not on the authorized attendee list. I'm a Whitford Properties employee, and I have business with the board. Ma'am, this is a restricted meeting. I can't let you. Is there a problem? Miranda's voice behind me. She looked immaculate. Navy power suit, Hermes scarf. Dulce? What are you doing here? I have information to present to the board. You work in the copy room. She laughed, sharp and performative. The nature of my presentation is confidential. You don't even know what ROI stands for. Return on investment. It's not that complicated. Before Miranda could respond, our father appeared at the end of the hallway flanked by 2 senior executives. Dulce, go back to your desk. This doesn't concern you. Actually, a voice called from inside the boardroom, it does. Margaret Coleman appeared in the doorway. 72 years old, silver-haired, standing with the quiet authority of someone who'd been building empires when Gerald was still in diapers. I invited her. She is standing to address the board. Margaret smiled at me. Let her in. Gerald's jaw tightened. But Margaret Coleman had been a board member for 32 years. Her authority in that room exceeded his. Fine, he said, his voice ice. Let her speak. We'll see how long it takes before she embarrasses herself. The boardroom held an oval table of polished walnut, 12 leather chairs, portraits of past executives on the walls, including, I noticed, my grandmother Ella Lehner, her painted eyes seeming to watch from above the fireplace. 12 board members took their seats. Gerald at the head, Miranda to his right. I was directed to a chair at the far end. In the corner, Jonathan Ellis sat with his briefcase. He caught my eye and nodded once. Board Chairman Robert Hartley called the meeting to order. "Margaret, you have the floor." Margaret rose. "The matter I wish to address concerns a document that has recently come to light, a document that affects the ownership structure of this company." She gestured toward me. "I yield my time to Miss Dulce Whitford." All eyes turned to me. Miranda smirked. Gerald leaned back with theatrical boredom. I stood. My hands were steadier than I expected. "Thank you, Mrs. Coleman. What I'm about to present may come as a surprise. I ask only that you listen to the evidence before reaching any conclusions." Before I could continue, Gerald raised his hand and stood. "Robert, I need to provide some context. Dulce is my daughter, and I love her, but she's not qualified to address this board on any business matter. She works in an administrative role. She has no legal training, no financial background, no strategic experience." Miranda chimed in, her tone dripping with false sympathy. "Dulce also has dyslexia. She struggles with reading. We've tried to support her, but some limitations can't be overcome with effort alone." "Mr. Whitford." Robert Hartley's voice cut through like a gavel. "Miss Whitford requested this time, and she's entitled to use it." Gerald sat down. His expression promised consequences. Miranda caught my eye and mouthed, "You're embarrassing yourself." I looked at them both, my father, my sister, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Something colder, clearer. They weren't trying to protect me. They were trying to protect their version of the story, the version where I was nothing. "Thank you, Mr. Hartley. I won't be discussing my reading ability today. I'll be discussing this." I held up the will. The room went silent. "This is the last will and testament of Ella Lehner Margaret Whitford, founder of this company, notarized September 12, 2019. Gerald's face drained of color. "That's impossible. My mother's will was executed in 2015. You have a copy of her previous will. Under New York estates law, a subsequent valid will automatically revokes all prior testamentary documents. This will was executed 4 years after the one you possess." I placed it on the table and slid it to Robert Hartley. "Mr. Ellis, would you please confirm the authenticity of this document?" Jonathan approached the table. "I'm Jonathan Ellis, partner at Morrison & Blake. I served as Ella Lehner Whitford's personal attorney from 2008 until her death in 2021. I can confirm this will was executed in my presence on September 12, 2019. It was witnessed by 2 independent notaries, and the original is held in escrow at Chase Private Client." Robert Hartley studied the document. His eyebrows rose. "This will bequeaths 51% of Whitford Properties shares to," he looked up at me. "To you, Miss Whitford." Murmurs rippled around the table. "That's a forgery," Miranda said, but her voice had lost its confidence. "It's not," Jonathan responded immediately. "And I'd advise you against making accusations of fraud without evidence." Gerald slammed his palm on the table. "My mother was ill. She was being manipulated." "Manipulated?" I pulled out my phone. "Perhaps you'd like to explain this." I pressed play on the 2018 board meeting audio. My father's voice filled the room. "Eleanor is 81 years old. She doesn't understand modern business. I moved to reduce her voting rights to 10%. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. That recording, Gerald's face had turned a mottled purple, was a private board discussion, which Ella Lehner attended. I kept my voice steady. She recorded it, as was her right as a shareholder. It also establishes that my grandmother was present, engaged, and voting on company matters in 2018, just 1 year before she wrote the will you claim was the product of diminished capacity. Robert Hartley set down the will. "Miss Whitford, would you read the relevant passage aloud?" "For the record." I nodded. Took a breath. "To my granddaughter, Dulce and Whitford, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Whitford Properties LLC, along with all voting rights associated therewith. I paused. This bequest is made with full knowledge of my son Gerald's treatment of Dulce. She has been excluded, diminished, and denied opportunity, not due to lack of ability, but due to lack of support. Dulce is not slow. Dulce was abandoned, and I will not allow her father's prejudice to continue after my death. I looked directly at my father. The will concludes, I built this company from nothing. I choose who carries it forward. I choose Dulce. Gerald said nothing. His hands were trembling. Robert Hartley removed his reading glasses. Jonathan, you can confirm this document is legally binding? I can. The 2015 will is superseded. As of this moment, Dulce Whitford is the majority shareholder of Whitford Properties. Margaret Coleman smiled quietly. Richard Holloway and Susan Parker exchanged glances. And for the first time in my life, I watched my father look at me with something other than dismissal. It was fear. This doesn't prove anything, Miranda said. Even if the will is valid, Dulce has no business experience. She can't run a company. I'm not asking to run the company. I addressed the full board. I'm asking you to examine the facts. I pulled the 2018 board minutes from my portfolio. March 14, 2018. Gerald Whitford proposed Resolution 2018-07 to reduce Eleanor Whitford's voting shares from 51% to 10%. His stated rationale: the founder is no longer capable of understanding modern business operations. The resolution failed by 2 votes. Eleanor's vote and Margaret Coleman's. I looked at Margaret. Is that accurate? Margaret nodded slowly. It is. Eleanor called me that night. She was devastated. Not because of the resolution, she knew it would fail, but because her own son had tried to take everything she'd built. This is ancient history, Gerald started. It's evidence, I cut him off. Evidence that my grandmother wasn't suffering from diminished capacity when she wrote that 2019 will. She was protecting herself from her own son. And she was protecting me. Robert Hartley looked around the table. Does anyone else have documentation contradicting what's been presented? Silence. Gerald's jaw worked. No words came. Miranda stared at the table, her perfect composure shattered entirely. The board recessed. The legal counsel spent 45 minutes on the phone with Morrison and Blake, Chase's private client, and the New York State Court's records office. Gerald and Miranda huddled in the corner, their whispered argument growing increasingly heated. When the board reconvened, Robert Hartley read from his notes. Our legal counsel has confirmed the will presented by Miss Whitford is valid under New York state law. It supersedes all previous testamentary documents. Effective immediately, Dulce Whitford holds 51% of Whitford Properties shares. Someone inhaled sharply. Additionally, as majority shareholder, Miss Whitford has the right to propose motions to the board, including matters pertaining to executive leadership. He looked at me. Miss Whitford, do you have any motions you wish to bring forward? I stood. Gerald rose from his seat. Robert, this is... Sit down, Gerald. Hartley's voice carried unexpected steel. Miss Whitford has the floor. Gerald sat. His face had gone gray. I looked around the table at 12 people who, until an hour ago, had never considered me capable of anything. Now they waited for my decision. The power to destroy my father's career was in my hands. I thought about what my grandmother would want. And I made my choice. I'm not proposing to remove Gerald Whitford as CEO. The tension in the room shifted. Miranda's head snapped up. Even Margaret looked surprised. What I am proposing is a vote of confidence. The board will decide whether Gerald Whitford retains their confidence. If the majority votes no confidence, he resigns. If the majority votes confidence, I will not interfere with operational leadership during my tenure as majority shareholder. If Dad has the board's confidence, he has nothing to worry about. Robert Hartley studied me for a long moment. Something like respect flickered in his expression. Is there a second for this motion? Seconded. Margaret Coleman didn't hesitate. All those expressing confidence in Gerald Whitford as CEO, raise your hands. For hands went up. Gerald's allies. People who owed their board seats to his recommendations. all those expressing no confidence. 7 hands rose. The motion carries, 7-4 with 1 abstention. Hartley turned to Gerald. Mr. Whitford, the board has voted no confidence. Per Section 14.3 of our bylaws, you have 30 days to tender your resignation. Gerald said nothing. He stood and looked at me. Really looked at me. For what might have been the first time in my life. I expected rage, hatred, threats. What I saw was worse. Recognition. The understanding that he'd underestimated me so completely that he'd lost everything. He walked out without a word. Gerald caught me in the private corridor outside the boardroom. Priscilla was with him, her face tear-streaked, mascara bleeding down her cheeks. You just destroyed our family in front of 12 people, Gerald said, his voice barely controlled. I didn't destroy anything. I told the truth. Priscilla stepped forward. Dulce, sweetheart, we were trying to protect you. You've always struggled. You didn't protect me. You erased me. 20 years of silence crystallized into words. Every Christmas dinner, every family photo, every conversation where you talked about Miranda's achievements and pretended I didn't exist. That wasn't protection. That was abandonment. This isn't over, Gerald grabbed my arm. We'll contest that, Will. I pulled free. You'll lose. And you know it. Because Grandma Ella Laner planned for every contingency, including this one. I walked toward the elevator. Behind me, I heard my mother's voice. Dulce, wait. I didn't wait. For the first time in my life, I didn't need their permission to leave. The elevator descended 42 floors. By the time it reached the lobby, I'd wiped my eyes and straightened my borrowed blazer. The adrenaline that had carried me through the past 2 hours began to ebb, leaving something unexpected in its wake. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Grief. I just severed 28 years of hoping things would change, of believing that if I was patient enough, quiet enough, good enough, my parents would eventually see me, love me the way they loved Miranda. That hope was dead now. I'd killed it myself. Jonathan Ellis was waiting by the security desk. What happens now? Now I go home, sleep, try to figure out what my life looks like without the family I thought I had. I stopped at the revolving doors. I don't want to be CEO. I never did. I just want the company my grandmother built to be run by people who actually care about it. The next morning, Gerald Whitford signed his resignation letter. Robert Hartley was appointed interim CEO. And the board offered me a formal position, strategic advisor. A role that would allow me to participate in major decisions while I determined my long-term relationship with the company. 3 weeks later, an all-staff email went out to the Whitford Properties team. Among messages from colleagues who'd never learned my name, one stood out, from Patricia Morales, an executive assistant who'd worked directly with my grandmother since 1987. Dulce, Eleanor used to talk about you constantly. She said you saw things others missed. I never understood what she meant until today. Welcome to the boardroom. She'd be so proud. I saved that message. Some validation doesn't come from family. Sometimes that's better. June 8, 2024. My mother called. Can we talk? Just us. We met at a coffee shop in Midtown. Priscilla looked older somehow. The careful makeup couldn't hide the exhaustion beneath. I want to apologize, she said. For everything. For the way we treated you. For the things we said. For the things we didn't say. Are you apologizing because you're sorry or because everything changed? She flinched. Both, she finally admitted. I'm ashamed to say it, but both. I was so focused on Miranda's success, on maintaining appearances. I told myself we were protecting you from expectations you couldn't meet. But that was a lie. You let Dad call me worthless in front of family, in front of business partners. You never defended me. Not once. I know. And I can never undo it. But Dulce, I don't want to lose you entirely. I looked at this woman who'd been my mother for 28 years, who'd braided my hair as a child and forgotten my birthday as an adult. I can't pretend the last 20 years didn't happen, I said slowly. But I'm willing to try building something new. Something honest. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was a start. August 2024. Miranda called while I was walking through Central Park. We sat on a bench near Bethesda Fountain. The August heat pressed down like a weight. Miranda looked different. The armor of perfection had cracked. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back carelessly. "I've been in therapy," she said. "Since May. 3 times a week. Turns out being the golden child isn't actually a gift. It's a different kind of cage. Dad expected me to be perfect. Every grade, every achievement, every award was never enough. It was just the baseline for what came next." She stared at the fountain. "And the way they treated you, I told myself it was just how things were. That I was protecting you by not challenging them. You weren't protecting me. No, I was protecting myself. Because if I defended you, I became a target too." She finally looked at me. "That's not an excuse. It's just the truth. I just wanted you to know I see you now. Really see you. And I'm sorry I didn't look sooner." We sat in silence. Two sisters who'd grown up in the same house as strangers. "I can't go back to how things were," I said finally. "But I'm not interested in staying enemies either. Maybe we start over from scratch." Miranda's eyes filled with tears. "I'd like that." November 2024. 6 months after the board meeting, I moved into my own apartment in Brooklyn Heights. 1 bedroom, pre-war building, a view of the bridge my grandmother had walked across to her first office in 1965. My new salary as Director of Sustainable Development at Whitford Properties was $185,000 a year, plus dividends from my shares. A new division focused on green building practices and environmental impact, the kind of innovation my grandmother would have championed if she'd lived to see it. Gerald called once a month now. Short conversations, polite. He asked about the weather, about my new apartment, about work. We both pretended the past hadn't happened. Priscilla and I had lunch every other week. Slowly, awkwardly, she was learning to see me as a person instead of a problem. Miranda and I got coffee on weekends. We were learning each other, really learning, for the first time. Neither of us pretended the past was okay. But we were writing a new story. On the wall of my apartment, I'd hung my grandmother's portrait, the same one that had watched over the boardroom for 40 years. Sometimes, when the evening light hit it just right, I could almost see her smiling. "You gave me the tools, Grandma. I just had to be brave enough to use them. 6 months ago, I was invisible. Now I was finally fully myself." Looking back, I understand something now that I couldn't have understood at 27. My grandmother didn't leave me 51% of her company because I was better than Miranda. She left it to me because she knew I wouldn't let power corrupt me the way it had corrupted my father. Dyslexia isn't my flaw. It's part of who I am, like my visual memory, my patience, my ability to see patterns others miss. The things that made me slow in my parents' eyes were the same things that made me see the truth when everyone else looked away. Gerald judged worth by credentials, by degrees, by performance. Ella Laner judged worth by character, by kindness, by the way people treated those who couldn't fight back. And now, finally, I get to judge my own worth. Not by what my parents say, not by what my sister achieved, not by what any stranger thinks. By my own standard. My own measure. My own truth. If you've ever been the overlooked one, the dismissed one, the one they said would never amount to anything, hear this: you don't need a secret inheritance to prove your value. But you do need to give yourself permission to stop seeking approval from people who will never give it. My family hurt me for 28 years. But I didn't need to hurt them back to find peace. I just needed to stop waiting for them to see me and start seeing myself. That's the real inheritance my grandmother left me. And nobody can ever take it away.